So as you can see here, I've got a creative design element that we could use for a background. And this is using Trapcode Particular. Over here, I've got a blank composition with the background laid in and a couple of shape elements that I'll be using for this composition. If I solo this, I've got a simple ramp effect and a grid effect applied to this, and behind that, just a simple black solid. So it creates sort of a light blue to dark blue effect there. I've got just a basic circle using the circle effect. And then I've got a couple of adjustment layers in here. One of them kind of blurs everything just a little bit. And another one here is masked off to give sort of a circular blur right here where the circle is. So what we'll be doing is adding some additional circle elements that float through. And as you can see, they are largely avoiding this circular area. This obviously could be where a logo or something else could be placed. But as the particles swoop through, we can see these little trails behind them. And when they hit the circular area, they kind of avoid this area. So let's see how to get this done. Let's switch back over to this blank composition and create a new solid. And apply Trapcode Particular. Now another comp I have in here is this particle comp. If I open this up, I've got 3 different shape layers that are simply animating over time. Scale up, scale down. All 3 of these kind of do the same thing in varying ways. This becomes the particle for Particular. So again, it needs to be in the comp, but it doesn't need to be on. I'm just going to turn the visibility of that layer off. Now if I go into my Particular layer here, I'll go into the particle section and select the particle type to be custom colorize. And you notice that this is sort of a red, white, and blue. This is not the color scheme that we're going to be using, but it does have some varying luminance values. So when we select custom colorize, Particular is going to colorize it based on the luminance values of that custom particle. So in my custom section here, I'll select particle comp 1. And for the time sampling, I'll select random loop. What Particular is going to do is, because this composition is seamlessly looping, the beginning and end are identical, it'll pick a random point for each particle that is born, and from that point it will continuously loop this composition and assign that to the particle. So each particle is going to be a little bit different using a different point in this 5-second composition. I can turn this off. Let's solo this Particular layer. Now we're seeing that they're a little bit small. I'll turn the size up to 40, and I'll add a size random percentage of 50%. So these all have just a little bit of different size. Now, we are colorizing these, so we need to define some sort of color to be assigned to these. Right now we're using white, so we're sort of colorizing the luminance values to something that doesn't have any color. I'm going to set this to be random from gradient, and in the color over life, I'll select this preset right here. So we get all different kinds of colors being assigned to all the particles. Each particle is being assigned a random color from this color map right here. And in fact, I'm going to select this blue and turn down the saturation just a little bit. Now in the transfer mode, it's set to normal right now. So when the particles overlap, there is no color blending. I'm going to set this to add so that there's a little bit of mix going on there. Now let's set the particle motion itself. I'm going to put the emitter over on the left side here. The example I'm constructing here has the particles being generated from left off screen and floating from left to right. So I need to put the emitter over all the way to the left. So I'll just drag the position X, Y so that the X value is off screen to the left. Now these are being emitted from a single point. I'm going to set this to a box so that the emission area is going to be much greater. I'm going to turn this y-axis size of the emitter up to 350. So now these are being emitted from a much larger area rather than a single point. I'm also going to set the direction to directional, so I can tell it to emit in a specific direction and have them move across the screen. I'll have to set the Y rotation value here to 90 so that they're actually emitting in the correct direction. So they're getting there. First of all, we can see they're not getting very far. They're dying right about there. And again, we're at the 3-second mark here. And the particles start dying right around there. Again, the particle life always defaults to 3. So I'll set this to about 7 seconds. This should give us enough time to have them float through the screen once we adjust the velocity. So let's do that right now. Let's adjust the velocity, go into the emitter section, and turn up the velocity to about 200. Do a quick preview here. Now it's starting to get there. As we can see, we've got way too many particles. It's kind of just clustered together here. Let's turn this way down to about 20. So they're just kind of floating through the screen. In fact, maybe we need to turn that down even more. Let's drop that by half. So I'm going to unsolo this and drag it below some of these layers here and park it about 4 seconds. So in the example I showed you, they were kind of avoiding this area. If we were putting a logo here, we wouldn't want so many particles floating right through this area of interest. Fortunately, Particular has a great feature in the physics section under Air, which is called the Spherical Field. What the Spherical Field does is define an area that we can have particles be either attracted to or pushed away from. So we have a strength and a radius and a feathering on this field, and we can also visualize this field by checking the box right here. Now the strength is set to 0, so if I set this to 100, we'll see a little red area. And this indicates the area in which particles will now be pushed away from. It's a little bit small, so I'll turn the radius up so that it's about the size of the circle in the center. So now you can see that in this red area, as particles approach it, they will tend to be pushed away. Now, this is a three-dimensional particle system, so sometimes particles will go well behind the area, but by and large, particles will mostly avoid this area and not go through it. We have some area of feathering around the edge here that we can define. If I turn this down, it will push them out even further. I'm going to leave a little bit of feathering on here. And we'll turn the visualize field setting off now. We don't need to see it. We've got it set exactly the way we need. And let's do a quick preview. One more component I'm going to add to this is by using the Aux system, which I mentioned very briefly early on in this tutorial. If I twirl open the Aux system, take a look at the controls here. We have everything grayed out, and we have one control here that's set to off right now. In short, what the Aux system does is one of two things. It can emit particles from our main particles, or it can emit at what we call a collision event. And we'll cover collision events in detail later on, but right now what we're going to use is emit from main particles. So essentially what's going to happen is that our particles themselves are going to be particle emitters. This is exactly what the Aux system does. It makes particles become emitters themselves. And you'll see that we have a similar set of controls that we do in the particle section to control the particles that are being emitted from the main particles. So how many particles per second we are emitting from each particle, the lifespan, the type of particle, the velocity of the particle. Right now the velocity is set to 0, and as these particles travel, we can see that the Aux system particles are relatively traveling in a straight line behind the main particles. If I turn the Aux system up, we'll see those particles start to disperse and move on their own as they are emitted from the main particles. I'm going to leave this velocity set to about 25. Now, their color is kind of a rainbow color right now, as you can see. Their color over life is being defined from this default map right here. It's going from the red to the yellow all the way to the blue. If we'd like those particles to be the same color as the main particles, what we can do is tell it to inherit a percentage of the color from the main particle. Right now it's set to 0, so it's just using this color map right here. So we can actually do a mix of color between another map down here, like this map right here, and we can dial in a mix between the two if we'd like to mix the colors up a little bit. Or I'll just set this to 100% so that the Aux particles are inheriting the same color as the main particles. Also turn the size up to 10 so it doubles. And the size over life, I'll use this map right here so that they start large and then trail off. In fact, I'll turn the size up just a little bit more so they get a little bit bigger. And let's do a quick preview of this.